be able to grab. Today, we're really lucky in being able to grab some time from Mark O'English, the WSU Archivist, to talk about, I asked him to talk about his most unusual things in the archives. But at the same time, I'm sure a lot of you have items that maybe in the back of your mind, you're thinking about, what should I do with them? Where could I make somebody else make use of them, or things like that? I know I do, even though that they're not necessarily scholastic in nature. And so Mark, I was asking to bring in both ideas. First, the fun of what's in our archives that we can tell others about or enjoy. So Mark, I'm going to have you go ahead and get started on a show and tell, and you decide how you want questions.
Yeah, you are more than welcome to interrupt and ask questions, I would think. The one thing I will note is I'll talk about this in a minute, but I'm juggling several screens here, so I am not going to be watching the chat. So maybe I might ask that Christina or Sue, if you see questions pop up in the chat that you want to interrupt with, please do that. Other than that, the other thing I'll say, sorry, I missed something.
Perfect.
The other thing I will say too is, I'm going to talk about this in a minute, but I'm playing slightly with two webcams simultaneously. One is a document camera. I don't think, as I set it up, this will mess with my volume, but if you see me turning around to grab things and I'm still talking, you can't hear me, someone out there shout and say, could you speak up or something? It's the first time I've tried doing this, so we'll see how it works out. I am going to start us off though with one of your traditional PowerPoints here, just like 6 little screens really quickly, just to kind of introduce you to the department. I hope we're seeing the PowerPoint here. Suddenly I'm not seeing anybody's faces, so but somebody nod if you can see the PowerPoint there. Okay, thank you. The brief introduction to the department, introduction to me. My name is Mark O'English. Like she said, I'm the University Archivist. I've been at WSU since 2001, in this position since 2008. Our department down here is Manuscripts, Archives, Special Collections, or the MASC, MASC. We are open 8:30 to 4:30. You're welcome to come down whenever you like. If you don't know where we are, look for the lovely conical glass skylight over the Terrell Library. Come in that, go down the stairs, and we're the first door on the right. And we are very easy to find. And I love talking about university history, particularly with those people who know more about facets of it than I do, which is going to be all of you. Let's see, there we go. Like I say, I do the university history. The department is more than university history. We're in archives for the region, for the Northwest, all sorts of things down here. But the university history is my bag here. Some of my favorite elements there that I don't have room for on this one. And as Sue said, as you guys have retired, moved on, done other things, lived your lives, you've accumulated stuff that you're probably thinking, does this have value? Should it be kept? Does it belong at WSU? Where does it belong? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, more or less illustrated through the 10 items. I'm not really going to focus on this, but it is something I noticed they asked the new retirees right on their first page there. So it is something you guys do care about, it looks like. Come back, there we go. If you come into my department, what you're going to see is a lovely reading room, which should be right on the other side of this window you can't see behind that webcam. And that's all you ever see. That is where we ask people to work with the materials. If you ever get a chance to go behind the scenes though, there is a vault on this floor with about 70,000 rare books in it, dating back to about 1480 when printing was kind of a new and cool idea. However, since I only date back to 1890 as the university person, I'm not going to be focusing on the books here today. There is a lot of stuff related to university history, a lot of stuff produced by university faculty and others over the years. But most of my stuff is one floor below in this locked climate-controlled vault you see at lower right, where we have lots of these boxes containing documents, photographs, films, all sorts of things relating to the history of the university. My elevator pitch on my job, we collect, organize, preserve, share the history of the university. I imagine all of you being retired faculty and staff had the experience of going into somebody's office after they've left and trying to make sense of the ruins of what are left behind, or worse, someone who's passed away, and trying to make sense of what's there after they died midstream. When papers do come to us, we will sit down and go through them, try to determine what has what we call enduring historic value, and then organize those materials if they need it, put together guides so that people can go online and find out what type of materials we have here. I do that. I employ students to do that. You can see one working in the upper right on somebody's papers there. Preservation is also part of it. We have a conservator downstairs. This one, in this particular photo, one of our former conservators is working on one of the original blueprints of Community Hall, which had come to us, A, moldy, and B, torn in several places. So she did a lot of work to repair those. That's my intro to what I'm going to do here. What I'm going to start asking you guys first. My first of my 10 items that I particularly like here. This is that lovely cement elevator. There's air quotes on my lovely there. That cement elevator that stands behind the Cub. If you haven't been in Pullman in 5 or 6 years, in this photo, this is the Cub over here. This is the football operations building, which is moderately new. The stadium's on the other side. My question for you guys, you do the raise of hands or something. How many of you know what was in that spot loosely before we put the Cub in? The Cub opened in about 1950. Well, it started construction about 1952, opened in 1954. Does anybody out there think they know what was there from 1938 on until? I don't see any shows of hands. Cool. Let me jump to, oops, come on. There we go. I have 16 seconds of film that somebody donated at some point in time. I don't know who, that show us what was on that spot before the Cub went in. We are one of 2 campuses, as far as I've been able to determine, in the country that have actually had a ski jump literally in the body of their campus. I can, if I want, I can go into the Evergreen and I can find out, yes, we had a ski jump. Yes, it was built in 1938. I can find mentions off and on of students using the ski jump. But until I can actually do something like show photographs, or even better yet, show film of the ski jump in use, it's really hard to picture or imagine what that ski jump would have been like here on campus. So that's more or less in my 10 items here that I picked. Probably most of them I'm picking because they help us tell the stories, not necessarily because they're cool and exciting in and of themselves. I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be playing slightly chaotic here as we go. If you look behind me, I have a cart sitting over here, which is full of those boxes from the basement, which I pulled up, which have my 10 items. I have another cart sitting over here, which actually has my 10 items pulled out and preset on them. And this is the one point I'm going to move this camera, I hope. I can do this without making people too sick. I have a little web camera set up here on my desktop that I'm using as a document camera. So I'll be hopping back and forth. So I apologize as I have to turn my back on the camera occasionally. The thing I love about the archives, the best thing about the archives, is getting the students in to work with the history firsthand. And I didn't necessarily want to do it by just showing you guys pictures. In my perfect world, you would all be here. I'd have all these out of the archives in the reading room, and you could handle them and work through them and get a feel for what this history was like. We'll do the best we can here, though. So jumping over to the web camera for the first time, and hopefully this works. Someone nod that you're seeing a nice coin there sitting in the center of that screen. Okay, cool. Everything is working here as planned. Item number 2 on my list is this lovely little coin. If you are not familiar with, hold on a second, I'm going to move half of this Zoom thing out of my way so I can see my screen a little bit better. Okay. The focus on the webcam is not great. I'm going to read what it says around the side, which is T.H. Jefferson, President of the U.S., AD 1801. And on the back of it here, it says peace and friendship. And if you're not familiar with this, what this would be is a friendship medallion. And what these was when the Lewis and Clark expedition headed out for the West, they printed out, they made a whole bunch of these for the Lewis and Clark expedition to give to the native tribesmen out there or to trade with them as an expression of friendship with the United States government. This is not an original one, actually. This is a replica. I still like it though, because we did have an original one here at some point, and it lets me talk about what we do with documents here, with history here. In, I think it was the early 60s, it could have been the 50s, forgive me. We were doing archaeological, anthropological digs down on the Snake River. And we were excavating Nez Perce burial sites or Nez Perce campsites. And one of our students in excavating a Nez Perce grave found one of the original Lewis and Clark friendship medallions. This was a major find. It was brought back up to the university and it came here to the archives and stayed here at the archives for quite some time. It is no longer here at the archives for a couple of reasons. Let me go ahead and stop sharing for a second. I'll hop back and forth between being me and being the camera there. I mentioned enduring historic research value is one of the reasons we like to keep things here. This in and of itself probably lacks enduring historic research value. I mean, you can go, there are plenty of things which have published, which have pictures of these, which show you what they're like, what they look like, how much they weigh. I mean, there's something to feeling in your hands that give you a feel for that. But it probably doesn't necessarily have enduring historic research value. In a perfect world, something like this is better in a museum than in the MASC. Sorry, I derailed myself for a second there. The other thing is, where does it best belong? This came to us from students excavating a Nez Perce grave site. There is a very strong argument to be made that looting a Nez Perce grave site, those materials really belong to the Nez Perce. And that is what happened with the original. It was given back to the Nez Perce. I don't know for sure. I bet a small amount of money. It's now in Spalding. And if you want to go see the original, you can get under the National Historic Park in Spalding. The point of some of that being, there is amazingly cool history out there. We don't necessarily collect all of it. Not all of it belongs here. I've been working with one of our alumni off and on since maybe a year or two pre-COVID, who attended here in the 1960s, was very active in her sorority, had collected all sorts of materials, and she donated what ended up being about 4 boxes of material from her sorority that really illustrates in a very lovely way sorority life in the 1960s. That we took. We are excited to have that here. She has from her father, who was a World War I soldier, his original uniform, his medals, souvenirs he collected in Germany, correspondence back and forth with relatives, family, friends while he was at the front. And the catch there is that her father is from Texas. He grew up in Texas. He never came out here to WSU. So those materials, the uniform doesn't necessarily fit what we do. The other materials are probably best close to where he came from. So what we did is we sat down and worked with her, and I found a museum in Texas, a historical museum in Texas / archive, that is very excited to have those things. And the people doing that research have it in the community. So if you have stuff that you think may or may not belong at WSU, but want to talk to somebody about where it might belong, we're happy to help you guys with that type of stuff. She has another relative who was a later relative who was a fighter pilot in Vietnam, and he has nose cone films from his jet during missions in Vietnam. And you might imagine that is an amazing historical resource. WSU does not particularly collect military science, so we found a military museum that those are going to go to as well. There's lots of stuff out there like that. Tell you what, let me jump back to the document camera here and jump back to another document. Ooh. Yes, we are, sorry, I saw the questions are popping up here for me there. So we are happy to help work with you in the process of rehoming things. We have rehomed several things that we do hold here in the archives. Usually we try to, if possible, manage it before they get transferred to us, because the moment you actually transfer them to us, state law comes into play as to what we can do with them. So we would like to work with you in advance. Sorry, and I should have read the question out that I was responding to, but someone was asking about if we help in rehoming items. This is a dance card. This is from a junior prom. Got the little WSC logo, WSC logo in there, sorry. This is the junior class. The thing this webcam does not do well is focus, unfortunately, so I'm going to be reading a lot. The annual semi-formal Saturday, April 13th, 1946. If you're not familiar with dance cards, the basic idea is in those dances in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, you would pre-schedule your dances and who you would be dancing with. So in the first dance, she was dancing with someone named Jack. The second dance was not scheduled. The third dance was somebody named Claude. As you go back in here, you'll find the patrons and patronesses in the back, guests. And my question was something like this, is this really a historic document? Does it have research value? Again, I like to hold it up there, like you say, get an idea of the scale on it there. And you can make a strong argument that something like this does not have historic research value. It does, it's cool in that people looking at the 30s, 40s, 50s can get a firsthand feel for what someone might have been carrying with them at the dance, what it was like. The reason this one falls in my favorite top 10 items here, let's see if I can make this readable up here. The junior class presents, and then you see the theme of the dance, which is atomic fantasy. And then if you look at the center where the dance things are, this has a lovely nuclear cloud as the background for this. I will guarantee you, if our students were to do something today with a nuclear theme, with nuclear clouds rising as the decoration in it, there's going to be some serious outcry of some sort and some backlash of some sort. But this is Saturday, April 13th, 1946. The nuclear bombs that were dropped on Japan were July of 1945. This is not being the least bit ironic. At this point in time, nuclear bombs were American science at its greatest. The nuclear bombs had ended the war. They had brought our soldiers home. They had prevented who knows how much loss of US life. Nuclear bombs were a wonderful thing. And our students today, even us today, it's hard to really conceive of that. It took the Russians getting nuclear bombs for nuclear bombs to become a scary thing. Those of you in this period of science, you can find lovely things shortly after this, where we have plans for detonating nuclear bombs underground for improved mining. One of my favorites is plans for creating natural harbors on the Alaskan coast by using nukes for excavation up there. So this little dance card, which is at some level a fluffy little nothing that one of our students carried with her to a dance, is really a wonderful way of sharing the evolution of science and the evolution of popular culture with our students today, and has become one of my favorites for that. I'm starting with some of the cool ephemeral stuff here, I think. Let me show you another thing that is one of my personal favorites. Let me bring back my document camera. Chunk. What you're looking here is a photocopy of the front of a book, which has been tied in twine and therefore not been opened here. I love to bring this out and show it to students. This came to us from a former student. His name was Philip Dash. We do have this book here. And the reason I like to show the book, I like to look at this and make people guess how big the book is. This is the book, and this is a quarter sitting next to it. This really is a book. If you zoom in on it, I literally scanned it. This is a scan of what you were looking at there, those little twines or the little string tied around it. And it has been faded over the years and is smudged. But if you sit down and try to make sense of that, you'll see this is a Bible. We're looking at John 4:11 on this page. The Dash I mentioned that this came from, Philip Dash was his name. Sorry, I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing again. I'm just gonna jump back and forth here. He went here to WSU and then he served at the front in World War I. And he carried this with him at the front in World War I. I am told it came in a small case with a magnifying glass in the top that would have helped you read it. I am still not 100% convinced you actually could read this. But if you wanted to have a Bible with you at the front, this is how you would have done it, because you didn't have that much capability to take that much personal equipment with you. My personal theory with this is probably that it was more of a good luck charm. If you had a Bible with you, you were carrying God with you, and therefore he would protect you while you were at the front. But again, the fact that this was carried by a WSU student at the front in World War I, it's one of those ways to connect with students how different life was back then and how different things might have been for them at that point in time. I love those documents. I have to stop talking every time I try to switch back and forth, which illustrate different periods in time. What I have here in front of me do not have direct WSU ties, say they're related to somebody who went to WSU, but their grandparents, parents, things along those lines. And these are old photographs, very specific types of old photographs. This is a daguerreotype. Oops, sorry, I bumped my webcam there. I knew I was going to do that eventually. The cord hangs off the back here. And plus it's trying to reflect at us. I knew it was also going to be the case. But this is a daguerreotype. This was when photography first became something people could access. This was probably created in the 1850s. That's when daguerreotypes were first created. It is developed directly onto the glass. There's no negative involved. If you can hold this up and see it, it's done through a process that involves silver. So a daguerreotype always has this kind of faded silver look to it. Another thing I have sitting here is an Ambrotype, which is about 10 years later. It did no longer involve silver, so it was a little bit cheaper. You can see even just there, it does not have that faded look. It's a much crisper thing. These followed along 10 years later. What you notice about these still, they're in these very ornate frames. And that's very symbolic of how valuable these were. It was very expensive to do this type of photography in the 1850s and 1860s. You guys retired having lived a full life, probably having had a little bit of money set aside. You might be able to afford these. Our college students today would never be able to afford one of these in this particular time. What happened about 10 years later is something came along called tintypes or daguerreotypes, and this is where photography starts becoming affordable to the man on the street, and you could go by a booth and get one of these made. And you see it's no longer in an ornate frame, and it's very flexible, cheap metal it's on. If I hold it up by the webcam and try tapping it, I don't know if you could hear that. There's definitely a slight metal, almost plasticky tang to these things. The reason I love these particular items is because we have a fine arts program here in campus, and we have a history of photography class involved in that. And students can sit down with their textbooks and they can read about how an Ambrotype was made, how a daguerreotype was made. But until you actually get to sit down and work with these type of things and hold them in their hand and flex a tintype or look at the frame or adjust the daguerreotype against the light and see the silver reflecting on it, it's hard to really get a full grasp on what these type of things were and what they did, how important they were in the cultures at the time, how the culture looked at it, particularly in a day-to-day where photography is so disposable. Even when we were growing up, probably, at least it was harder. We had to have at least the little Kodak disposable cameras, and we had to take them somewhere and be developed. But the idea that moving back to a point where photography was something only the rich could afford. I love that we have this type of stuff and we get to share it with our students, and the students get to come into MASC and experience this type of stuff firsthand. We juggle through really quickly here. Oh good, I'm still on the document camera. Sticking on the photography theme are these two young ladies. This is a photograph of two people who, Eileen and Irene Heinrich. They are identical twins. They came here to WSU in about 1930. This is obviously a photograph of them. If you're not obviously getting this, by the way, this is not a black and white, or this is not a color photograph. This is a black and white photograph. Color photography would have been expensive at that time. So what they did was called hand tinting. So this is basically a colored photograph. The people at the photo studio sat down, painted in the eye color, the cheeks, the rosy lips, the blonde hair, the green shirt. By this point, photography is much more affordable. You could have multiple copies. Those other ones you could never have multiple copies of because there's no negative. There are negatives of these, but really why we like Eileen and Irene Heinrich, I mentioned they're a pair of twins that came here to WSU, and what they would do is every week they would sit down and in one envelope, they would drop a letter to their mother and father up in Spokane. This one's dated March 27th, 1932. And each of them would write a letter and talk about what was going on campus, what was going on in their lives, what campus life was like. And this is a wonderful way for me, for students to come in. We always love documents from the time that let students see what things were like from the point of view of the people who were here. We're a particular fan of these two things. I'm just gonna let this slide there. Because these were two very different students. They were identical twins, they lived together, but one of them was what you might think of as your traditional 1930s girl, where she was here, she was majoring in home ec, she was really kind of getting her MRS degree with a plan of going on and getting married and settling down. The other one was very much of a scientific point of mind. I think she majored in chemistry. One of her hobbies was she would collect roadkill. She would bring it back to her dorm room. She would peel off the flesh. She would boil off what was left of it and then rebuild the skeleton into the animal in her dorm room, which is pretty much my definition of the worst roommate ever. But in any case, it's really kind of lovely to get to sit down and look side by side at these two students. So they're identical twin sisters. They're kind of different slants of what life was like here on campus, and get students to look at that firsthand. At these two letters, one of them had actually done a presentation on campus just at this precise time. So she's all stressed out and talking about what went into it. And the other one is much more relaxed, but does talk about how her sister's presentation went. And there's always odd things you take away. I can't really read this, but I'm gonna try it anyway here for you. This one starts, dear folks, if we want to get this letter off on the 6:10 train, I'd be better getting this one written, which just even throws me in the first sentence, because we're so used to communication today being, I jump on my cell phone and my wife texts back 20 seconds later. And even for us, the idea of, you just drop it in the mailbox, it gets collected and go. And I'm just like, do you have to run the mail down to the train station to meet the 6:10 train? There must be mail collection going on up here in the 30s. I mean, just one sentence in this, and I'm already finding myself asking some questions about elements of life that I don't know anything about, which is one of those lovely things. It's lovely when the stuff answers questions for us. I also love it when the documents, the materials ask us questions about life. One that answers questions for us is another one of my favorites by Don Dillman, who I'm guessing some of you guys know. He and his wife Joy are still here in Pullman. I've met them many times, but this is a 35-page document. This is actually 2 copies of it. As you can see there, After Mount St. Helens, 7 Gray Days in May, written in May 1980 by Don Dillman. And basically, as Mount St. Helens, the eruption was happening, he sat down each day and he wrote their experiences about what was going on. Those of us who remember Mount St. Helens, I was in Southern Oregon, so I was outside the loop of it. But those of you who might have been here who might remember that, you could sit down today and tell me about your experiences about it. And that, don't get me wrong, that's very valuable to have, but that's colored by 40 years of whatever we've learned about Mount St. Helens and other volcanic eruptions and what we've seen elsewhere since then. And to have these original documents from someone writing about it as it happens is a wonderful thing for us to be able to get to look at that period in time. One of my favorite takeaways on that, being here, I've looked through some of the materials as Mount St. Helens was erupting, and some of the farmers in the area were concerned that the ash would effectively kill their crops and nothing would grow for years on their farmland. And now we know it's actually good for it. But it's not something you think about 40 years after the fact, because we have 40 years of other knowledge coloring our experience. Sticking with Mount St. Helens, this is going to count as part of the same number here, are 7 photos that I have here. I'm going to try to catch these from the side. It's not good to touch the photos of the effects of Mount St. Helens on campus. So you look out the window, see cars covered in ash, people out here cleaning steps. Once again, I bumped my camera, I apologize. People cleaning steps, people wearing masks and protective gear, firemen hosing down things, students walking around with handkerchiefs over their masks so they're not breathing, or handkerchiefs over their faces so they're not breathing in stuff, dust coming up as they gather. Why am I showing those 7 photos? They're not particularly exciting photos of Mount St. Helens, really. There is, by the way, also some film footage out there, as Mayor Johnson well knows, since he is hosting it. I imagine most of you have seen that. But the thing about these 7 photos of Mount St. Helens for me, That is literally all the original photographs we hold of the effects of Mount St. Helens here on campus. There's probably two things that happened there. One, I believe lots and lots of people took photos of the effects of Mount St. Helens on Pullman and on campus. If I had a camera at that point in time, I would have taken photos of what was happening to my house, to my lawn, to whatever. But the other side of that is those are very cool and a part of my history. So I'm keeping those photos. And that's what happened here. Photos taken by the Evergreen, by the Chinook. Students walked off with those. None of them came here. These 7 photos survive of what the university photographers took. The rest of them got taken some point in time, maybe then, maybe years later, but long before they ever came to the archives.
Did you ever get any material from KWSU? Because I was teaching TV news and we had our TV program that we did on Channel 10 about St. Helens the day of, and also a week later interviewing agriculture people.
We do not have an original of that here in the archives. It exists out there on the greater internet. I believe it's WSU News who holds it, but we don't have a copy of that there, that here, an original copy. And we haven't gotten anything else with one exception, which I wasn't going to show, which is sitting here on my desk waiting for me to do something with, which is this. Sorry, I'm trying to hold up to the camera, which the side of this box says raw footage, Mount St. Helens aftermath. But nobody here on campus can play this anymore. So I have to find myself a vendor and see A, if 40 years after the fact this still survives, and B, if it's really this, or if somebody just found an empty box and threw it in it. So I don't know, we
refer to that as quad. That was the quad machine.
Yeah.
At one time they had at least one quad working at KWSU TV, but I don't know.
Yeah, I asked a few years ago and they said they no longer did. It's possible they just didn't want to be bothered with people come in and asking them that, but I was told, no, we don't have it here. I can find a vendor and do it, but it has not yet happened.
Question. Are you only interested in originals as far as the photographs go, or do you want scans of people's personal collections?
As a general rule, we do not take scans of materials. We take only the original materials. That is supposed to speak to the historical, reliable accuracy of it, the authenticity of it. I doubt somebody is really photoshopping some sort of Mount St. Helens scan to, I don't know what you do or why, but generally the archival practice is you only take the originals of them. There have been cases where I've worked with people where we've sat down and provided them, we've done scans of all their materials in exchange for their materials, because quite often they don't necessarily need the originals anymore themselves. But the archival practice is no, you generally only take originals. That's getting a little weird these days, as originals are often born digital, but it's going back as close to the original as you can. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you so much for explaining that.
Yeah. Like I was saying, in any case, back on those 7 photographs, I think there are tons of photographs out there at Pullman. I think everybody's keeping them. One of my vague hopes is that people start to pass away or start to wonder, what should I do with these before I pass away? These will come here to the archives. I also kind of wonder if that's not true, because everybody's going to think what I thought. They're so common, nobody will want these. I mean, how many photos of Mount St. Helens have to be out there? There's lots of events like that that I would love. I'm hoping to see the history come in over time. The student strikes of 1970, we have a decent amount of documentation, a decent amount of photographs. I really want to get the stories from the students who were there, or from the faculty who were there, those people. We did, the university, I say we, it was well before my time, in 1989, did an oral history project for the centennial, where they interviewed older students, older faculty members, and have them talk about what life was like as students. So we have lots of people talking about, again, 40 years later, what it was like on campus in World War II and in the Great Depression and a little bit in World War I, but not so much what was recent at that time, like the 1970s student strikes or Mount St. Helens or things that have happened since then. It's a project I would love to see the university pick up again at some point in time, because we don't want to wait another 20 years to get people's stories of those type of things, because we'll start losing those people. and those memories will start fading as well. Let's see. Let me jump on here to try to get through the rest of these. I think I'm down to 3 documents left. Let's see. Actually, I got ahead of myself there. Let's jump back to being me, because this one I really need to hold up. This is the item here in the archives which far and away is connected to me the most. This is a scrapbook. It says WC on the front. It has the name of the creator on the back, Logan Wheeler. I think I talked about this. I met this scrapbook myself in 2014, and I think I may have talked to the Retirees Association in 2014 about it. So if some of you were there, you might know a little bit. It also got mentioned yesterday in a little video they put out on me on the campus for some reason. Don't know why you would want that, but I met this scrapbook, which by the way is about 114 pages of stuff. Sorry, I have to move Mount St. Helens here out of the way really quickly. There we go. That'll give me a little bit more room. It's about 114 pages of the life of Logan Wheeler, who was a student here from about 1914 to 1918. I first encountered it because in 2014 was the centennial anniversary of the bookie, and they were asking for photographs of the original bookie. And they were thinking the original bookie is what we all remember as the bookie, what's now the Chinook. But what they didn't realize was for 5 or 6 years, the bookie was actually over where Wilmer Davis Hall now are, and was facing Stevens Hall. You walk out the front door of the bookie and be looking at Stevens Hall over there. And I went hunting for photos of that and could not find it anywhere, and getting desperate, started going through some of these old scrapbooks that covered 1914, and these 3 photographs actually are the bookie. Logan Wheeler had friends who worked at the bookie, and they are sitting on the front stoop of the bookie. And that's literally all we know of what the original bookie looked like. I can find some aerial stuff, or not aerial stuff, some drawings which give me an idea of the shape of the building. But as to what it looked like, I don't know too much. But in flipping through this, I got to look through the rest of the scrapbook, and it's really a lovely scrapbook. We're used to photos of, actually, let me jump back this way again. Photos of 1910s, 1914s being very stiff, like this photo of graduates up here, where everybody is just kind of standing here posed. This guy's not a bad example, though he's smiling, where they're just standing there posed, and it's not reality, it's not real life. They're posing for the camera. He took a lot of photos of his sorority friends, of campus life, which really show you what his life was like. And I'm going to use a few things from it really briefly here. You may or may not know that at that point in time, all the male students had military training as part of their life here. Come the end of spring, they would go off and they'd do a 1-week military encampment somewhere. This one was Fort George Wright. And you kind of see a little bit of what that was like. This is another one of those things that asks questions of me that I still can't answer. One of his friends, Bob, is shaving here with a bayonet, and the text under it is, Bob got his wires crossed and tried to catch his 9 on a side with a bayonet. I have Googled and searched the heck out of anything, trying to figure out what a 9 on the side references. I literally have no clue and have not found anything out there on the internet, which is a pretty big space to look, trying to figure out what a 9 on a side is. I love that it's just like, I just don't understand the life in 1914. He has photos here. This one is a Moscow Mountain picnic where they took a horse and wagon to go out to Moscow Mountain. And it shows what life was like there when he did that. The odd thing about that, of course, is Moscow Mountain by horse and wagon is going to be kind of an all-day trip. It's probably like running to Yakima and back to do something, which is not the way we think of that type of thing today. I told you all the students had military training. One of the things that was really cool for them is when the Pan American Pacific Exposition was held in San Francisco in 1915, all of our military students had the opportunity to go down there, and they got 2 weeks of training, military training at the Pan American Pacific Exposition, and then 2 weeks off to just explore San Francisco and explore the expo. So he has photographs in here of the ship trip, of the steamship trip down to it. The ship was named the Cadet, and you can see what life was like for the students on that. Let's see, what else do I got in here? I know Logan Wheeler was from Yakima. I've done a little bit of research on him. Oh, let's let you meet Logan Wheeler very briefly here, if I may move around too quickly. This is Logan Wheeler. He was a Derry student. He was from Yakima. You can find various quotes around him. My favorite one is somebody talking about him. He moved as if he had springs in his heels. In any case, again, these very, very slice of life photographs of campus. I know he sold aluminum pots and pans. Elsewhere in this is his business card. He sold aluminum pots and pans to pay for college. What's my other flag in here? I flagged something else. Some generic photos of campus. But again, his frat brothers, photo of somebody with their chicken. How often do you see a photograph of somebody posed with their chicken in the 1900s? Somehow that day, with 1,000 or so photographs are on these 114 pages. Now there's his fraternity brothers. I kind of fell a little bit in love with this particular scrapbook and this particular student, and kind of wanted to know more about what happened to him. But my job being what it is, I kind of had to put the scrapbook away and move on to other things, because there's always other things needing done here. Following day, I told you this was 2014, I am working on, for our front area, an exhibit which is going to be on the effects of World War I on the Palouse. World War I started nationwide in 1914, so we're looking at the centennial, though the US didn't become involved until 1917. But I am flipping through this book, WSU Military Veterans, Heroes and Legends by C. James Kwan, working on this. And in the upper right-hand corner here, sorry, I'm trying to dodge so I can see, you can see it. I meet this little piece of text, which basically says, I have to cheat and bend it. Logan Wheeler, Corporal Army Infantry, son of Mr. and Mrs. F.H. Wheeler of Yakima, Washington, received training at Fort Lewis, Washington, killed in action in France. And I have this really odd experience of meeting this student who was here in 1914, who was amazingly alive and is doing these wonderfully cool things on one day, and then the next day he's dead as a soldier in the fields of France. I knew, of course, mentally, I mean, he was long since dead, but I guess my mental image was him living a long life and having lots of kids and doing cool things. And I have a very visceral memory of sitting here in my office as I found this, looking out in the atrium, seeing students walk past, knowing that 100 years earlier, this same space would have been the gymnasium, and Logan Wheeler probably walked past that day, having no clue what would happen to him 4 years later, and looking at our students and wondering where their lives would be in 4 years and how different things can be that fast. And it almost has a little more impact for me today with what's going on in Ukraine. I'm wondering where we could all be in 4 years and this type of thing. The point of this being, well, I'm going to hit another setup before I get to the ultimate point on this. I've told this story many times. Like I said, I told it in 2014, I think maybe for this group, I'm not sure it was. I've told it for various classes, let them get a chance to handle through that scrapbook. One of those classes, I happened to talk to a couple of students who were with Northwest Public Broadcasting here on campus, and they interviewed me and they did a podcast on it, a radio broadcast actually. They went to Yakima, they found surviving relatives of his family. He never had kids. He's one of those people who married his sweetheart on the train, or just as the train was pulling out of the station effectively. And they went back and found more about him and did this cast on him, which always makes me feel wonderful for connecting to it. But 2 years later, one of these two students went to France on a vacation with her parents over the summer. And she told me she was going, and we got together with her and got her a small cougar flag. And she went to his grave, and I still choke up. It's been 8 years since I met Logan Wheeler, sort of. Took a cougar flag there and put it on his grave. And for me, Logan Wheeler is going to stick with me until I die. He has become the epitome of what we hope to do in the archives, which is, to us, history is often dates and numbers. However many million, I want to say 6 million people died in World War I. It might be more like 13 million. It's an inconceivable number I can't understand. World War I ran from 1914 to 1918. WSU joined in 1917. A number, I mean, we can spit out numbers and dates, but when you meet someone who when you get to know kind of someone who went there and fought and lost his life, history stops becoming numbers and black and white pictures and dusty books, and it becomes real, it becomes true, it becomes stories, it becomes something students can connect to and understand. And Logan Wheeler, it's going to stick with me for the rest of my life as part of that. Let's see, I have somehow managed to lose my central piece for my webcam. Okay, we'll do this. I'm down to 2 more items here before we let you go free here. Very much along those lines, I asked, this is something I hadn't experienced, I hadn't met myself. Are we still there? Sorry, it's getting a little weird webcam thing over on the side. Okay. I asked one of my compatriots about suggestions for this because I didn't necessarily want it to be just me. And she suggested this item, which I'd never seen before, which is from a female composer whose name is Elizabeth Geiring. We actually don't know how to pronounce it. It might be Geiring. She was an Austrian composer in the 1930s. And what happened in Austria in the 1930s, of course, is the Nazis started setting up and coming through. And the Nazis really thought that music should come from nice Aryan male Germans. There should not be music composed by women, by Austrians, by Jews, by you have it. So she basically fled the country. The Nazis went ahead and destroyed a lot of things along those lines. She took a lot of her music with her, brought it here with her. And this is a letter written in 1966. It's actually a photocopy of the letter, I think. It says, "Dear Mr. Sigmund," she's writing effectively an archivist. It says, this is a strictly personal letter meant exclusively to your private eyes. I hope you don't mind. You'll be surprised, as I was myself, that you recently became the second most important man for me. Let me explain. I had an operation a few weeks ago, went very well, non-malignant, and now I'm in the hospital again, only for 4 days for some sort of treatment. With all that, I can't help thinking of what would happen to all my scores in case of my sudden death. A very unpleasant thought indeed, and I feel you're the only one who could help me. We don't collect materials necessarily based on what the people who hold them think their value are, because we all think our stuff is more valuable than it is. But there was a WSU faculty member, Hans Moldenhauer, who collected her materials. We have about 11 boxes of things like this, which is one of her original scores. And because he did that, her music survives today, and it is used here. People contact us about 10 times a year. Literally right now, I could jump to my email, and there's an email that came in this morning from a German company who reproduces the works of female composers, who wants to know what we have of hers and what we can use of hers. And as much as we might think this history is old and dead, the fact that it's preserved in some place like this keeps it alive in some way, shape, or form for the next generation. I'm going to throw you one more thing, and then I will be out of the way. I'm going to cover up the bottom of this. Dear Miss Christine, as earlier promised Aline Shader, I've enclosed a checklist which I carried and used. And I'm going to stop this and wave it around before I reveal what it actually is, because this is one of my personal favorite things. This is a small little 3-ring binder checklist. And if you look at it, probably doesn't necessarily have enduring historic research value because it's virtually impossible to tell what the heck it is. 1, SM201/202 deploy, 3 as required, 1500 MS1 CRT1 mech seek start item 2X. It's gibberish. I have no idea what most of that stuff means. I can't imagine any of you guys do. But when you look at the front of it and read up here where it says, this checklist was carried and used by me during the Challenger Space Shuttle mission of June 18th to 24th, 1983, John Fabian. Those of you, I imagine, I hope everybody on here knows who John Fabian was. If you don't know, John Fabian was a cougar who went on and joined the space program, joined NASA, and went into space on 2 different space shuttle missions. I am of the age, I don't remember the moon landing. I was 5, I think, at the time, maybe 4. My parents tell me I was fascinated. I certainly had the Tang moon rovers and all the little toys and all the space mission stuff the following decade. And there is something for me about the fact that I am holding in my hands right now something which has been in orbit around the Earth. Is just kind of mind-boggling to me. And again, I'm not sure it has enduring historic research value. It does speak to a couple things that I like about the archives. One, There's an old rule out there, somebody's rule, 90% of everything is crap. When I pull out these 10 items, I'm willing to bet of you guys, at least 5 of them, you're like, yeah, whatever, maybe it's kind of interesting, but I'm hoping that there are 1 or 2 at least where you're going, wow, that's cool. And you never know, everybody connects different ways. So this is one of those things that really connects to me, and we put it out there, we share it out there in hopes that students connect to it. It also speaks. Sorry.
Mark,
Yeah.
John, this is Nancy Stroop. John Fabian grew up in Pullman. Did
Yeah.
you know that? Yeah.
Yes. And the other aspect of that, which is kind of slightly where I was going there with this, is that he did not, when he got his degree here at WSU, he was not doing it with an eye toward becoming an astronaut. I mean, that was not even a possibility at that point in time. Well, it was starting to be a possibility. Just as I'm sure that Edward R. Murrow or Keith Jackson did not think they were going to become what they come, despite the fact that you could argue, WSU, out of the way, we're not Harvard. Whatever you might think of WSU, you have to give me that we're not Harvard there. But that these students went and built from small beginnings. It was John Fabian's connections here at WSU that got him to apply to the astronaut program. It was his own skills that got him into the astronaut program, got accepted him in there. But it was connections he made here at WSU that got him to apply to it. Several students from WSU applied to it as a result of the work of one of the professors here. But I just kind of love that kind of idea that from humble beginnings, WSU here, these people who moved on to these greater things. In any case, that is my 10 cool items that I particularly love here myself at WSU. I hope I didn't ramble on to there. Obviously, I'm going to stick around and I'll be happy to take questions or comments or whatever you guys like, if I can be of use to you all.
Mark, this is Earl Bennett. I live over in Idaho in Genesee. I was at the U of I for many, many years. And when I retired, probably 15 years or so ago, I was looking at some of the very early web information you had from archives on WSU's website, library website. And I found a property map for Latah County that's dated in 1893. And I got a hold of you. It wasn't digital yet. We got it made digital. That has got to be one of the most valuable maps that exist for Latah County. I've used it dozens and dozens of times because, of course, there was no census in 1890. But with a map, we can fill in all kinds of questions about who lived in our area and exactly where they were in 1890. So it isn't only WSU that benefits from that fantastic collection that you guys have. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I focus on the WSU stuff because my job title is University Archivist. We do have a manuscripts librarian and here rare books librarians, other people here who handle other things like that. But yeah, and I'm with you. A lot of people will look at that map and go, it's an old map of Idaho, who cares? But when the right user finds it, it can be amazing for people.
Mark.
Yes.
Hello, Mark.
Yep.
This is Pat Caraher.
Oh, hey, Pat.
Thanks for all your help over the years. There's a time capsule up there on the concourse above your office. And I wonder when, it was a 50-year time frame, I think. Do you know when that's going to be open?
I would have to look. I believe it went in with the opening of the Terrell Library, which would have been, what was that, 94?
I think earlier than, well, you might be right. I'm not going to argue,
I would have to
Second
double check. It's one of those things. It's the thing I always kind of joke with people. People say librarians know all the answers. Librarians don't all know all the answers. We know where to find the answers in a perfect world. I could find out for you fairly quickly and let you know. But off the top of my head, I don't know for certain when that was. My thought was that it was 94 that it went in. I know what's in it. I have a list somewhere in the archives of what's in it that I could spoil it for everybody.
Thank you.
Hey, Pat, this is Kathleen Warren. Are you talking about the one that's in the library concourse? Okay, well,
Yes.
that was put in, I was the head of the committee at the time with Tim Marsh and some other people. And I believe, and we had a mechanical engineering class design the capsule. And I believe it was to be opened 50 years from the centennial. Does that sound right?
That
I know,
sounds.
I figured I probably wouldn't be around, but I might be. So I think it has something to do with the centennial. And I think there's a plaque up there that has a date.
That could work.
Thank
That'd
you.
be 39, so.
I have a question specifically about the music that you showed. Performers often want to look at the ur text of a composition before performing it. That is the original text that the author wrote, whether it's Beethoven or Mozart or somebody much more contemporary. Do you ever get inquiries then about the musical text that you have, either from a performer who wants to see it or from someone who wants to transcribe it rather, and publish it as the ur text of that particular composition?
Again, I'm the university archivist, and that's the one thing that was in here that's not the university archives technically. So the reference questions with that unfortunately go to Gail O'Hara, not to me. So I hate to say it, I can't answer that, and I don't even speak music well enough to know the ur text. Certainly we have got requests from performers for things. One of the ones that I'm still disappointed never happened was one of our students did a music piece as a thesis in the 1960s, and there was a place in Texas, a symphony in Texas that wanted to perform it and finally decided not to, but I was always disappointed. The student's thesis, we contacted the student to get permission and she was so excited, and it never happened. But in any case, so yes, we do get requests for music here to be performed by people. Did that even come close to answering that?
Do you get similar requests though from other kinds of documents that people want to publish about WSU, either transcribe it or publish it directly?
It's rare that people want to publish more than a small portion of something directly. Most of the times people are coming here for research from the documents. Yeah, I think maybe I just leave that stopped at that. Anything that was produced by WSU, we can give people permission to reprint, and you do see that out there occasionally. If you've seen the football programs that are in Star Wars, Starbucks, the football covers, or the historic photos that are in the hardware store or in the hotel that's over there across from the movie theater, those are all things that came from here. But that's usually not in the sense of let's publish a whole big thing. It's more in the sense of let's find something that people relate to and they will find cool as they're in whatever business they're in. Does that make sense?
Question?
Sure.
Yeah, Mark, this is Bob Olson. I had a experience of actually using your facilities a number of years ago. We had an alum of WSU who was helping out with one of our programs by the name of Michael Thompson. He's been known by other people as well. But he offhandedly mentioned to me that his grandfather had gone to WSU and that he had attended the 1919 Rose Bowl, the first time WSU went to the Rose Bowl. I think that's what it was. Was it 16? 16.
January 1st, 1916.
And so I went back and there's a collection of photographs from Homer Dana. And we have a Dana Hall. There's a whole collection of his. And I pawed through that and in fact found a photograph, not of his grandfather, but of the students returning by train from the 1916 Rose Bowl. And he was very happy to have that. So it was kind of nice to have the archives. That's just one good example, I think, of it.
There's a decent amount out there. Before I had Elizabeth Gyring, my 10th item was a collection of things from the Rose Bowl, including 16mm film of that 1916 Rose Bowl, a ticket, 50 cents for the bleacher seats, and the program from the 1916 Rose Bowl, which is just kind of, it's hard to believe almost sometimes, even for someone who works here, that stuff still exists and is here and can be browsed through, looked at. Somebody asked there, Mike Wilkes was asking about size and dimension aspects of items. And no, sorry, I'm looking at the chat here since I hadn't looked at that. No, that doesn't limit things beyond the ability of beyond our ability to keep them here. There are some limits. Gail O'Hara, again, our manuscripts librarian, was recently up in Spokane, looking at some materials from, I'm going to blank his name, a major Spokane architect who came here from WSU. Brooks. In any case, he had like a 3 foot by 3 foot physical plan for, or physical model that was never used of what was hoped to be the Wood Technology Center. And they were wondering if we wanted that back. And we're just kind of like, well, it's cool, but we literally don't have room for that type of thing here at WSU. So that does happen, but we have some exceptionally large things, which for obvious reasons, I did not bring out here. I can picture right in my head right now about a 6 foot by 5 foot. No, it's more like 7 foot, 7 foot by 5 foot World War I poster, basically trying to build patriotic support for World War I that we've had out hanging here before. There's some fairly large stuff down there. And I see someone also commented on Paul Bryan's 1970s stuff. Yeah, Paul Bryan's did a wonderful talk, which we put online. He did his presentation. I think the presentation he came here and did is what we have put online. But yeah, he's given a lot of stuff to the archives, and I really hope that, well, I really hope I'm gone before him, but I really hope that when he does get to that point in his life, he does donate those things to the archives as well.
Anyone else have anything? Mark, we really appreciate your time, and absolutely your favorite 10, you picked well. Although there may be a lot of tours coming up in the next fall. Just sounds like something we should do.
There you go. We would love to have anybody come in who wants to come in. And like I say, I love sharing these things. Part of the job, collect, organize, preserve, share. And I don't get to do share often enough. So I love telling some of these stories that don't get told often enough and sharing some of the things that don't get shared often enough.
Right. Okay.
Thank you for inviting me.
Christina, do you have anything for us? No, we lost Christina, maybe.
No, I'm here. Nothing except for our next program. It will be on April. Sorry, bear with me while I get to my calendar. April 26th. So hope to see you all there.
It'll be a good one too. Thank you again, Mark. You take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye all.